All right, so first, guys, I just want to say congratulations on the movie. It's really entertaining. And I want to say this is very well researched as well. That's one thing I always like about documentaries in general is like they're very well put together. Um, I want to know, how long did it take for you guys to research this and assemble this documentary in the first place?
I mean, ongoing through to the end, even until now. Like,
Yeah.
it's a subject that is constantly evolving and constantly changing. And we started aggressively basically on day one and never stopped. There was no off switch to that faucet.
It was supposed to take 8 months, but it took 2.5 years. Is the other is
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. And a lot changes in 2.5 years, like there's AI on my phone now, and I
Mhm.
You didn't
I
ask
I
for
don't
it.
yeah, I didn't ask for it. I don't use it. You guys did make me feel a little more comfortable about the idea of AI, but this is a uh optimistic documentary, but I'm still like very hesitant, and it makes me kind of worried that my cousins are using chat GPT for school.
Hmm.
I don't really know how to feel about that. How do you guys how did you navigate this? Like, what was the first stepping stone to navigate this documentary and building it out?
A paper outline, like as unexciting and unthrilling as that is, it was let's get a sense, let's do all the research that we can right now. Let's get a sense of who's speaking in the space, who could be a potential subject, and let's put it together into like some kind of, you know, paper document that allows us to fill in the gaps. And then we kind of just use this as a start, and then we put out kind of a call to some of these subjects and some other people, and just like let's go out and film 30 people and see what they say, and then started kind of doing that battle building back and forth. But yeah, like I said, it was just kind of an ongoing process that just kept going and kept just churning within itself to get through right to the end. And yeah, like Ted said, it was supposed to be 8 months, and uh, we could have made a film in 8 months. It would probably not have been watchable. So this was when the film, once we got into it, once we got into that process, uh, I don't want to sound like hokey here, but like the movie tells you what it needs, and this one needed a lot more time and a lot more research and a lot more subjects and a lot more kind of ways to explore the story and represent the story.
Yeah, very early on, we had just wrapped our first set of interviews in November, I think, of 2024, 2020. Yeah. But that's, or maybe it was 2023 when
2023.
Sam Altman was fired as the CEO of OpenAI, and we just filmed these interviews, and so we immediately were like, well, what are we supposed to do? Do we need to redo this, et cetera, et cetera? And then 72 hours later, he was back in at as the CEO of OpenAI, and that was kind of a wake up call to us that if we were to try to chase the headlines surrounding AI, we were going to fail. So then the question became, how can we make a film about AI, the fastest moving technology maybe that's ever been created by humanity, and make it as relevant 6 minutes, 6 months, 6 years after it's out. And so that's really why we try to focus on, like, it's a couple of things: the intuition, giving people the intuitions of like how the technology works and where it will go from here, but also focusing on the human story because there are aspects of that that will never change. So that's really like the aspect of it, the movie being a very human movie, et cetera. That's really important.
I mean, I'm glad you guys brought up Sam, because that was one question I have, just because this guy is at the forefront of the whole AI movement. How was it landing him specifically, and like what were the logistics there?
Well, since this is the Blurs podcast, I can tell you this. I've never told, nobody else knows this, but I feel like you might be nerdy enough to be excited about this. Whenever we got anyone, are you Ghostbusters fan?
I was just
Yeah,
about to say this. Yeah.
So
yeah.
anytime that we got anyone from Ghostbusters 1, when they finally get their first call, Annie Potts stands up and she's like, yes, yes, and then she puts the phone down and then screams, "We got one!" And then all the Ghostbusters get in the car, they go down the thing. Anytime we got anybody, I would send that a time synced
That GIF was
a
in the group
YouTube clip of
was in the
that.
group chat. Yeah.
Yes, and it really is like, we tried for many years to sort of build up to a point where we essentially like there's a race obviously going on with how this technology is being developed. So the way we sort of thought about it is if we could get one, we could get one of the CEOs, we probably would get more of the CEOs. But it really was the case that any person that said yes was so instrumental to telling the story because we interviewed more than 40 people on camera,
Yeah.
and we interviewed more than 100 people on background. And each one of these people is so instrumental in telling the story because what we're trying to do is basically create like we said, give people the sort of full picture of how AI is being developed and deployed and how it will affect each person. Answering the question directly, like getting Sam, there's sort of like a huge celebration, and then there's a big like, oh wow, now we have to figure out when you have 2 hours with somebody or 1 hour with somebody, how do you basically how do you ask any question that is able to encapsulate all of the different, you know, things that the movie's trying to do, things that where the technology can go. So it becomes an enormous and daunting thing. But yeah, in the film, the way that it's positioned, without really spoiling things, like they sort of present the final boss, the CEOs, the final boss of this desire that Daniel and I think a lot of people have to be able to be told one thing that will mean that we don't have to worry about this. That that even if the answer is it's all going to go bad, like even knowing that at a certain point, something it's really at least comforting because you know it's going to go. But I think what Daniel discovers is that that's not the way that humanity's relationship to technology works.
I really do like that you brought up the human aspect of this, and I respect you guys for actually making a balance of like good and bad throughout the movie. Um, can we talk about that human aspect? Because this movie does act like a normal feature where it has like a three-act structure, and I thought that was really unique for a documentary that you don't really see much of.
Mhm. Um, Glad we actually initially start with a 5 act structure. Which is
Whoa!
interesting. Yeah, yeah, we were going Japanese for it. But it was, I mean, it's there's an emotional kind of journey to follow with this story, which is, what is this? And the first thing you see is it looks bad, and then okay, let's flip that on, and it's actually looking maybe like there's this possibility that could all be okay. To like, wait, hold on, we can't accept that it could just blindly be one or either. Let's find out what's really going on, and then let's find out who has the answers. Let's hope that there's a plan, and then I won't give away any more of the movie. But I mean, Daniel Rower was you know, he's a subject in the film, and we follow what he sees, what he experiences, what he feels as he goes through learning about this technology pretty much in real time, which is something that many of us working on the film also experienced as we went. So it was important for us to have a narrative that gave audience members something and someone to follow, to know, you know, okay, how I'm feeling, like I'm feeling scared, that's normal, that's okay, rather than just inundate them with information to give them some kind of life raft to hold on to. And the great thing about Daniel is he's he'll ask the questions that you probably usually want to ask a person. He'll get there with you, and it just it's a tough subject because if we just come at it with the stats and what's going on, and if you look at an LLM, one of our subjects says it kind of just looks like a bunch of Google Sheets, like it's a bunch of numbers and a bunch of charts, and there isn't really anything that you can make sense of from there. So we had to use the filmmaking language to make it cinematic so it's engaging, so that people are actually going to watch it, and you know give them something to follow along with. But it's also something that the implications of this technology are things that challenge our values. They're things that challenge our place in the world. And that really needs to be demonstrated, and that needs to be felt just as much as it has to be seen. So I know I rambled a bit on you there, Brandon, but let's keep going with this because this is a topic that I'm more than happy to just go all in on.
Charlie, you're not rambling. You're giving great answers. Just to add to this for both of you guys, one thing I've been thinking about is how these data centers for AI are being built and how that's like really impacting the environment and where people are living, where all this waste and stuff is happening uh in people's like neighborhoods and stuff. Did you guys run into that making this movie, and did you face any challenges in like addressing certain things certain way and being like, I don't want to say gentle, but just being respectful in how you present stuff like that?
I mean, absolutely, because in terms of the environmental impacts and even the displacement of people from their homes because of some of these power centers, that it was this tricky thing of there are so many subjects that we wanted to include in the film, but to include them as like a little footnote in a flurry of other issues that AI is creating felt disingenuous to some of these issues. And also some other, on the other side, some things felt like a film on their own. So we kind of had to toe that line, which sucks as a filmmaker, to, choose what to include and what not to include. And
Right.
we had to serve this narrative that our film was built around to, you know, get Daniel to the CEOs. So yeah, it was definitely a challenge, but did we discover many kind of issues and injustices with the technology as we went? Absolutely. It felt like constantly, and it was at times a really sad film to work on because, it felt really disheartening to kind of learn about so many things as you go. And, there's definitely this David and Goliath aspect of AI with, being a citizen versus being a tech leader. Um, and there are times where you just felt smaller and smaller as you went, and it was disheartening. But then you learn that you can't just let things happen. So yeah,
And that's one of the joke that we had often. It literally was the filtering mechanism that we used was that the goal of a first date's not to fall in love and get married. The goal of a first date's to get to go on a second date, and so that our film could not be trying to get you to marry AI because that would
Yeah.
alienate almost everybody. All we can do is provide enough information so that each person, regardless of who they are or what they care about, can see what their lane is. So in the film, there's sort of a large section at the beginning of Act Three that talks about present day harms. And we do allude to, like, it's really, to your point, like, I call them SOTs, which is very, I come from a TV background, but it's the archive, having archive montages showing these different things, showing a person in Tennessee turning their faucet on and having no water pressure because of a data center nearby. Pointing out that when Elon Musk started Colossus, they essentially used a loophole in EPA law to be able to use methane generators for 364 days. Like, it wasn't even articulated in that way with that level of specificity because there's also a challenge of whenever you give a specific, that opens the door to a whole other area. It's like it's like you're navigating space where every single topic has its own event horizon. If you go over, it can become its own movie. And so trying to keep things, we literally, in the edit, we had over 3,300 pages of transcripts, not including Daniel's family archive and news archive, where if we got to a point where we felt like we were getting too in the weeds, we just say that's second date, not first date. We just need to get people to a point where they're going to care about it. And yeah, that was the largest challenge of the film is there's so many places that I personally would have wanted to go deeper. But we had two directors, five producers, two editors, a story editor, co-producer, associate producer, and every one of those people, they had their own filters. And the fact that we were able to sort of come together and prioritize the film being entertaining, the film being able to be approachable, assume no previous knowledge, like it was a Death Star run. Like everything felt
yeah,
like there's so many things that can go wrong. And the thing at the beginning of this interview, you said that it was entertaining and that you felt like it was optimistic. The thing that's interesting is how the film holds a mirror up to themselves. Like I've had people tell me that this movie caused an existential crisis in them and we were so like depressed that they didn't know what they could do going forward. And that the film, we have 5-star reviews, or we have we have 1-star reviews on Letterboxd that say that we're a doomer movie. We have 1-star reviews on Letterboxd that say that we're a commercial for Anthropic. So the fact that we have both of those makes me feel pretty good that we actually threaded the needle between those two things. Because if somebody can see two exact different things in the exact same piece of material, that means that there was either we got everything wrong or we actually provided some bit of nuance in there. And I think the other reviews, I think hopefully will bear out that we that we did create this kind of platform for people to go up from there.
I want to ask you guys about that though, because like again, everything is shifting in real time and it's just crazy. So I imagine the pivots must have been hard as you're working on this. Like,
Mhm.
what was the hardest pivot where you found out something, you're interviewing somebody, and then the very next day something else comes out about AI because this technology is just constantly evolving where you're just like, okay, let's shift this. And then did you
Yeah,
guys all agree? Because like you said, you have two directors, you guys have all your producers, the story editor. I mean, everybody has to have a voice on a film.
totally. And to Ted's point, like the film I would have made if it was just me is very different from the film that Ted would have made, or that Daniel Rohr would have made, or that Daniel Kwan would have made. So this was really a microcosm of what kind of humanity has to do, which is we have to kind of come together and figure out kind of a collective voice for certain things, especially when it comes to AI. Um, Brandon, for this film, when we first started, it even the subjects and stories that we were looking at were very different from what we kind of had to. It was a go out onto the beach and turn over every single stone to decide which story we wanted to tell. And for me personally, one of my kind of things I was really advocating for in the beginning was like to try and tell the most evergreen version of this story. Because if we started in fall of 2023 and had a film done by December 2023, we that film would have no relevance right now in March
Yeah.
of 2026. So it was, how can we do two things? One, find the most evergreen version of the story, and also find a way that does put this film, this is going to sound really contradictory, but put it in a timeline as an acknowledgement of a point in time, maybe in human history, like time will tell if this was like an epoch moment for us, an epoch shift. Um, and it was actually when Sam Altman got kicked off the board at OpenAI that we kind of set all the alarms up, and we were going crazy and figuring out how do we get around this story? How do we zero in on this moment and this is what's happening? And I think it was 48 hours or 72 hours later that Sam was just back on the board, that we realized like, oh, we really cannot be reactionary to how we make this film and the stories as they unfold in real time, because you know, a film's timeline is long. It's you
Yeah.
you shoot
Yeah.
everything, and then everything you shot, you're editing for a while, and there's only so many adjustments you can make after you start really building it out. That, it works for most films, but for a story like this, it's like if something happened in real time when we're towards the end of the edit, that becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to put into the film. Unless you do like really wacky stuff. I can cite films as examples of that, but it was it was kind of the, whatever analogy you want. It was the hammer on the nail that we needed to, make sure that we had a big step back and we looked at this from way outside the bubble rather than inside the bubble.
And to your question, Brandon, the thing that was most challenging from the film sort of ends with a call to action of where we go from here. And because of the nature of wanting to make a movie that's as relevant like 6 minutes, 6 months, 6 years after it's made, there are all kinds of specifics that I would have loved to have pointed to. Like you mentioned, data centers. I believe 160 billion dollars worth of data centers have been canceled due to communities pushing back since 2023. And so that's a kind of thing where it'd be like, oh, it would be really great to say that as of 2025, like 160 billion dollars worth of data centers have been moved because communities push back, and to be able to like say that. But by the time that we lock the film in May of 2025 or whatever, by the time it comes out in January 2026, there could have been a complete reversal of that. And similarly, like talking about government action, no one could have predicted that 99 senators would have voted to pull out the moratorium on regulation out of the big beautiful bill. If we'd put that in there, that would have been great and a huge sign of hope until the executive order placing a regulatory moratorium on that would have come by. And it's there are all of these different ripple effects you have to be aware of, down to the level of like, one of the things I wish we had been able to sort of work into the film is the notion of whether or not, the fact that these large language models essentially are relying upon the data of all of humanity, which is yours and mine and authors and films, etc. And like my personal opinion is that that data was more or less stolen. In some cases, it was literally stolen, as the Anthropic lawsuit bared out. But if we were showing our subjects say that this data was stolen, and there's so many courts that right now that are litigating whether or not the fair use argument holds. If we showed somebody saying it was stolen and put that in the film, and then it comes out after the American courts have deemed that it's fair use, then that person essentially is committed libel because, or slander rather, because they're saying that it's stolen when in actuality the law shows that it's not. So it's like, I could give you actually 200 examples of things like that, but that's what our life was for two and a half
It was a
years.
mess to navigate, to be completely
Yeah.
frank, and it took kind of the brains of everyone working on the film to keep ourselves above board and ahead of, any possible issues by seeding something in the film that became
Yeah.
an untruth later.
And it also becomes a prism, though, in a way that helps you because you need to ask yourself the question, if I can't rely upon these things, what can I rely upon? And that's where the Daniel story and the human story comes in. We can rely upon being able to tell a human story of how humans coexist and co-evolve with technology and hopefully show people where that, like, if they can see themselves in that, then the actual sort of facts, we're all going to be, the tidal wave of headlines is never going to stop. But if you understand how it's impacting you and the questions you should be asking yourself, then we may make some progress.
I mean, I do have to applaud you guys because I personally, before watching this documentary, was all sour on AI, like all doom and gloom. And I like the point in the film where, your co-director's wife just says, "Hey, we can't end the movie like this. Like, let's
Mhm.
take it out like on a high note." And I do appreciate that you guys do have some optimism. What's something optimistic about AI you would like to share to people, like in general?
Charlie, do you want to go
Goodness.
first?
No, I don't want to go
Oh,
first.
I could.
Because to be completely honest, like I don't have too much optimism about it right now because here's the thing, Brandon, for right now it is so twisted up with an overall faith in humanity and if we get it right or
Mhm.
not. And even though I am, you know, I you know, I'm not trying to be pluggy here, but I am an Apocaloptimist where I'm really hopeful and I work towards making things go well, but I still acknowledge the, lesser natures of humanity. So I can't look at any one aspect of AI and say the thing I'm hopeful about without having the caveat that like here's the negative things I can do too. So I may be too in the weeds right now, but I'll shut up for a second. I'll let Ted go and I'll think and I'll try and give you an answer.
There's two answers. If you're talking about, so let's talk. There's the technology, and then there's the culture. There's like society, us as a species. The thing that gives me hope, we mentioned that Sam Altman getting fired very early on, many years ago, and then coming back. A lot of people in the safety and ethics community, they basically were like, we're done, because the whole point of OpenAI was that it was supposed to have this corporate infrastructure so that if they didn't trust someone, that the board could remove somebody, and then it was sort of a failsafe. The way that one of the subjects that I spoke to referred to it as uh, what this proved is basically that OpenAI pulled the emergency brake and the emergency brake came off at their hand and they realized there was just a button underneath there that said go faster. So that's how
Oh,
they described that moment. And that scared a lot of people. To me, the reciprocal of that moment is a few weeks ago when the Department of War essentially, deemed that Anthropic was a supply chain risk and came after Anthropic because they didn't want to. There's many different stories, but let's just say that there was an implication that Anthropic was concerned about using their technology for mass surveillance and for autonomous weapons, and they wanted to basically firmly declare that their technology could not be used in that. And so the Department of War canceled their contract. And on that Friday, Sam Altman tweeted like, "Hey guys, good news! OpenAI is going to take it over." Over that weekend, 150 million people canceled their paid subscription to ChatGPT, and then on Monday, Sam Altman had to say, "Sorry, our bad. That was the words he used is like, that was very sloppily written. We're also not going to do mass surveillance and also not going to do autonomous weapons." So the fact that 150 million people can decide not to spend $20 on a thing and that would actually result in a public confirmation of changing values, that's good. However, the story of technology is, and the story of capitalism is, there will always be incentives to do things that might not align with what is the best for society. Devaraji, who's in our film, was instrumental in getting. They were basically they publicly shamed Amazon for selling facial recognition software to law enforcement because it was one that it's like very 1984 to be doing that period. But the other problem is it just didn't work that well, especially with people of color. And so a lot of people, specifically, there was a really outrageous story of a woman who was like 8 months pregnant who was arrested because of an erroneous facial recognition hit. She was
Whoa.
instrumental in getting that. Basically, Amazon committed to not doing that, and that was a huge, great success. However, then they bought Ring, and then they started selling the ability for law enforcement to use Ring for facial recognition. This is the story that we'll be going with forever, and that's where people really need to become involved, because when they hear stories like this that their values don't align with, the thing that is really true is these companies are so in debt. The debt ratio of all of these different labs is so extreme that if they cannot show that their user base is increasing, then it creates an existential threat for them. So now is the time to be able to be using your voice and your money to steer where the technology is
It's all
going.
speculative valuation,
Yes,
right?
and it's important to know that we should never trust any company to act in our benefit, because there's also just too many damn people on Earth.
Yeah.
So it is incumbent upon us to speak with our money, to speak with our mouths, our community, each other. Because if we don't do that, then the default path continues, and that only leads to uh, really dystopian things happening. But I do believe, going back to the notion of what makes me optimistic, I do believe in humanity's capacity to push back against things that violate our values. And the really good thing is, currently, there are a lot of violations happening that, regardless of your race, background, gender, politics, geography, there are so many different things that we should have off the table, and people are becoming aware of that and pushing back.
Yeah. And to sneak in my answer there, I'll basically echo exactly what Ted just said at the end there, which is the amazing thing about human beings is when we do face great challenges, including existential threats, um, that's when we kind of really have an opportunity to show the amazing things that we can do. So it sucks to that we have to play that game to show those amazing capabilities, because the opportunity is generally scary because of the high risk of failure, but it is the only time where we can kind of really show what we can do and restore things.
I appreciate both of you guys' honest response to that. Like, that's the perfect way to wrap up, because I could sit here and talk to you guys honestly all day because I have like a million more questions. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, thank you,
very
Brandon.
excited to watch this movie again, honestly, because it was a lot to process the first time. And now, after talking to you guys just now, it's like I got to revisit the movie again.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so
Thank
glad.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you,
Yeah,
you,
guys.
Brandon.
thank you so much for your time, Brandon.
Yeah.
Thank you.